a submarine can sink a bunch of them at once. But then they finally realized something. The ocean's huge. And it's basically the same odds to catch a group of 30 ships on the high seas in the middle of the ocean, to be in the right spot where it sails into you, as one ship. I know that seems a little weird, but remember, it's just the vast size of the ocean. So you put all the ships together in a convoy, it's easier to slip by. And you can protect all the ships together at once. Once they started going to convoys, shipping, the number of ships sunk dropped like a rock. And their blockade failed. By 1918, yeah, they're still sinking ships. Yeah, it's still dangerous. But the Americans end up shipping 2 million troops over. Not one American troop ship was hit by a German submarine, which is absolutely remarkable. When World War II began, immediately, I mean, the first thing, that September 1st, 1939, when II began, convoys. But the other thing was this: Germany didn't attack. Germany didn't attack while the blockade was going on. When the first shock of the blockade hit, Germany probably should attack someplace here, the British lines, put pressure on. Put pressure on. They didn't. They lost so many men at Verdun and the Somme, they held back. So Britain could absorb the initial shock, adjust to the convoys, and the Americans entered the war. It was a dumb idea. They never should have done this. I know it's easy to say that in hindsight, but there's a reason why they didn't do it in 1916. So, they did that at the same time then. America is mad, and then this came out. Another reason to go to war, the Zimmerman Note. That's supposed to be an N. Not better? The Zimmerman Note, or telegram. What it was is Arthur Zimmerman was the foreign minister of Germany, and they're already thinking back at the end of 1916, what if America enters the war? We need to keep them tied down. This was a note to the German ambassador to Mexico City. And it was, if the U.S. entered the war, they wanted Mexico to attack the U.S. They promised them all the land that Mexico lost in the southwest U.S. after the Mexican-American War. They said, you'll get Arizona and California back. So if America did enter, they thought Mexico attack, U.S. would be occupied, so that would give more time to drive Britain out of the war. Now this is insanity, absolute insanity. It is so dumb and arrogant, the idea that they could do this. First off, Mexico is in a civil war. Mexico's been fighting a civil war for nearly a decade. In fact, while this is going on, this is when something you've read about in your book. We've had the Mexican intervention. The United States has already got themselves involved in this. This is part of big stick diplomacy. Heck, in 1914, the United States shelled the port city of Veracruz. In 1916-17, U.S. cavalry was chasing a Mexican revolutionary / bandit. Do you remember his name? Say it again.
Is that right?
You're right, but I didn't. It's Villa, but yeah. In Spanish, those L's would be silent, but it's Villa. And they were chasing him. I know you want to say Villa. I do too. We speak American here. Yeah.
So, how does Villa?
He was a Mexican revolutionary fighting in that Civil War, but he also was kind of a robber. He attacked.
Oh, okay.
And the U.S. was chasing him in northern Mexico. U.S. cavalry had kind of invaded Mexico.
Okay, so what does that mean for this? Like, how does that affect like the Zimmerman now?
And so the point of the issue was, part of the thing was Germany thought Mexico would be mad because of this, but also this means that the United States really saw Mexico as in their sphere of influence. Remember, what is that doctrine that said no interference in the Western Hemisphere?
Roosevelt Corral.
The Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. This is our area. Now Germany's getting involved. Can you think of anything that will make Americans mad? That's the point. We already see this, the U.S. is our area. And now Germany's trying to get involved. This infuriated the United States. How did the US find out about the Zimmerman note? But it was in code. The British were smart. The British had broken their naval and diplomatic code. They did for the whole war. This would be decisive in a lot of different battles, especially the big naval battle of Jutland. We didn't talk about Jutland here. But the British had broken their code. The British broke this code. And then what did they do with this? So they got all this information. They knew America would be furious. What did they do with it? They told us. Not yet. You're on the right track. They waited for something. What?
Well, I was trying to say they can wait for them. Waited before America would join.
Yeah. They know this might encourage America to join. They know they want America mad at Germany. What's going on then? Beginning of January. What did Germany begin? And what was Britain waiting for? Now American troops.
American ships to be sunk.
American ships to be sunk. And as soon as some American-owned merchant ships got sunk, they knew the U.S. would be furious. And then the British could say, and look what else they did. And show them the Zimmerman note. And we would just go nuts. Do you remember the Spanish-American War? What was that letter that criticized McKinley that helped push the United States into the war? Cannot be put out by Hearst. Do you remember that? Do you remember the letter? D. VD. Sounds like it is. That sounds bad. I know we can't remember everything. It's the DeLome letter. Does that kind of sound familiar? Well, it should. The DeLome letter, that's the one that that the Spanish ambassador to the United States criticized McKinley. So it's very much like this, isn't it? And now Wilson's got no choice. He's got to ask Congress for war. Wilson doesn't want war. Remember his slogan in 1916 was what? Yeah, and now he's kind of got to do it. This is a big deal. So the Zimmerman note was like basically the straw that broke the camel's back. The number one reason, of course, is unrestricted submarine warfare. So on April 2nd, 1917, did I say second? Okay. April 2nd, 1917, he asked and Congress would declare war. Now, the thing about that was, it wasn't unanimous. There was some feeling against the war, but it was a pretty good majority. There's this anger, this we got to do something kind of anger. We've been out of the war too long. We got to help end the thing. After the war, or after the vote, there would be a lot of people who would regret this vote. And going into the 20s and 30s, there would be a lot of members of Congress who voted for it would be very upset about it. You know, they say that they were tricked. One important person we have to get, a Republican member of Congress from Montana, would have make one of the very prominent votes. Who was it? Jeannette Rankin was a Republican. I was going to write Rankin, fourth period, and I wrote down Jenkins. Jeannette Rankin Jenkins. And she was elected in 1916. Why was this unique? Woman. Yes. The first woman elected. And Montana allowed women to vote back in 1914. Remember, the 19th Amendment to allow women to vote nationwide wouldn't happen until the 1920 election. So this was a big deal. Rankin would vote against this. She was a progressive, and she was completely opposed to war. She really believed that all war was morally wrong. All war led to, well, she could see it. All chances of reform ends with war. And so she voted against it along with others. But you can imagine what's going to happen with war madness once that took over. She's going to be called what by 1918?
A traitor.
Yeah, essentially a traitor. And she would not win re-election in 1918. In the late 1930s, it looked like war was going to happen again in Europe. And a lot of Americans did not want to be pulled into another horrible war. There was an isolationist wave, keep America isolated. And she would run again and win in 1940 for her old House seat. So she lost in 1918, won again in 1940. And what would happen?
She voted against war again.
Yeah. After the Japanese attack on the American base in Pearl Harbor, and other places, she voted against that declaration of war, and she voted against the declaration of war against Germany after Germany declared war on the US. Now, she's the only one. And now think about this logically. She knew what she was doing. She knew that the United States has no choice but to go to war. So she's not saying the US should just surrender. It's one vote in Congress. There's 435 members of Congress. She knows it's going to win. So what is she doing when she makes this vote?
Not being a hypocrite.
Yeah, she's making a statement. She's not a hypocrite. Yeah, she's not making a vote that might say the Japanese are going to win. She knows America's going to war. She's saying, I don't care, I'm opposed to war, and somebody should still make a stand against war. That's not going to work for her in the election. You can imagine she won't be reelected. But that's why she did it. Yeah.
So did British show us the early known after the Lusitania was sunk?
No, remember the Lusitania was back in 1915, so it was after, but that's 1915. We're now up to 1917. Remember, the Lusitania happened and Germany pulled back from unrestricted submarine warfare.
Yeah.
Then again in 1916, it pulled back.
So is there like a certain ship that I need to know?
Not for this one, no.
Okay.
And so that's Rankin. So the United States has entered the war, but those aren't the only other reasons the United States entered the war. It's more complex than this, and it always is. First off, Wilson was very much an idealist. He wanted the war to be a greater cause. If we're going to make this horrible sacrifice, it just can't be for freedom of the seas and for France to get territory back. We need a bigger cause. So what he said was, in his war address, we'll make the world safe for democracy. We're fighting for a world, a better world. Yeah,
Who said it?
Wilson. A world safe for democracy. And when Wilson, this idealist, who believed that he was the moral compass of the United States, when he looked at this, it's basically for these basic things. Democracy was those ideals of the Declaration of Independence. The social contract, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Also, Jacksonian democracy. He believed that we are fighting for this idea that ultimately the people are, what is that word for control? Do you remember that word? Sovereign. The people are sovereign. Ultimately, I don't know why I'm writing like this. I should get better control on culture. But it's too small. People are sovereign. Want me to write smaller?
Yeah, no, just have it be
Yeah, there's an E.
How much you read?
G.
IEGN.
Oh, it's EI, isn't it? It's EI because it's GN. Thank you. Very good. It's I for E, it's FFC or in front of GN. Yeah. Don't you hate the English language? Shouldn't it just be like EN? Yeah.
I'm confused on how those two tie to make the world safe for democracy.
What his definition of democracy were the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, the concept that the people are sovereign. Does that make better sense?
Yeah.
And lastly, what wraps it up? How do we put this into practice? What does this mean? The word would be, and this is a word that goes on through the rest of the next 100 years, so obviously today, self-determination. We let the people decide their own fate. And Wilson was thinking, if we let the people decide, they'll pick some kind of representative government where the people choose their leaders, or representative democracy, like the United States has. But it's more than that. Remember the nationalism. Remember the Austro-Hungarian Empire with all those different nationalities. Who were the people who lived here? When? So the Slavs should have their own state. The Poles should have their own state. The Lithuanians, the Ukrainians, they did mention the Armenians. So it also means nationalism. Let people decide their own fate. That is worth fighting for. That will lead to a safer world. That will promote trade and prosperity and whatever. Give me a minute. Think we're gonna give Puerto Rico their independence? Hawaii, give them back their independence? Not a chance. You think we're gonna enter the war and Britain's gonna give India their independence? Not a chance. This sounds good. Do you remember that map I showed you of this area and all those different colors, all the different people? You remember that? How do you decide who gets what area? Do you want to guess how they're going to decide? It's not going to be pretty. This sounds good. It might be a great goal, but he didn't really mean it. Or a better way to look at it is he did not think this out. He was very naive. He knew very little to he knew next to nothing about European history. All Wilson knew about European history was that there was a place called Europe. That's shocking how little he knew. But it sounds good, doesn't it? What is this? What is this an example of?
Propaganda.
Exactly. This is. Oh, did you say
And
Jimmy?
I think these are wrong, I just say them really.
I know. And then sometimes I say, no, you're wrong. I don't
And they're always
know.
right. When I say
You're always right.
No, when I say them really quietly, they're right. But then when I say them out loud, when you're alone.
So next time I have confidence, like that.
Well, when I say this wrong, you just tell me like.
Yeah, this is pure unadulterated propaganda. It doesn't mean it's wrong. These are noble goals, but it's a heck of a lot more complex. Remember propaganda. You don't tell everything. Are there other reasons? Yes. And the other reasons get into the complexities of the war. Allied propaganda worked. Allied propaganda about poor little Belgium or other German atrocities. What did they call German soldiers?
Monsters.
What was it? Yeah, the Huns, which are monsters. But the Hun, that by you're calling someone a Hun, that's a barbarian. That's an insult. Allied propaganda really did drum up anti-German feeling well before the United States entered the war. Also, how do countries borrow money? What do they issue to borrow money? Bonds. The Allies have been issuing bonds like mad. Wars are shockingly expensive. You're not trading a lot of material when everything you need is for war. And so the Allies are borrowing money. Actually, it had a very complex way of doing it to the end of 1916. Britain actually was the one buying up the bonds from French bonds, Belgian bonds, Russian bonds, Italian bonds. So you get that? Britain was doing it. But Britain, then they had to borrow money. Who did they borrow money from? American what? Not what kind of Americans? Remember basic diplomacy? Who was buying up the bonds in these Latin American countries? What kind of corporations? Monopolies. They could be monopolies, but what kind? Specifically, what were their? What?
Thanks.
Exactly. U.S. banks. U.S. banks. So these are corporations. The bankers, investment bankers. They're buying these up. And the thing is, as a country has to borrow more and more money, how do you get people to buy your bonds if you're really borrowing a lot? What do you have to raise? Yeah, the interest you pay back. So U.S. banks are making it, they're basically making, a gamble. We're going to loan them money. Who knows how the war will turn out, but we'll get a lot more in return. Well, at the end of 1916, Britain, they actually sent people from their Treasury Department, their Chancellor, their Exchequer, to Wall Street, to all these U.S. investment banks, and they did a massive bond sale. So they're borrowing a bunch of money. And Britain, at the end of 1916, made it very clear, we're almost out of money. This is close. And Britain goes under. What happens to the rest of the Allies? That sent shockwaves through the American financial system. The banks were, uh-oh. What is the only way they get their money back? They get the value of the bonds plus interest.
If the Britain stays,
What's that?
if Britain doesn't go down.
Britain doesn't go down, and
The Allies win.
and the Allies win. If the Allies don't win, if the Allies lose, this will ripple all over. They were terrified. This could lead to a financial disaster if they don't get their money back. And it's not so much that they need the money back, it's just the security of the financial system will be damaged. So there's going to be this underlying push beginning in late 1916 into 1917 that we've got to get into the war. We've got to get into the war. Bankers. Bankers will push this. So the big investment banks. Don't think the local little consumer banks. I'm talking about the big banks. They're nothing like the banks today in size, but fortunately we live in a society today where the big banks don't have that kind of power, but back then they did. Like, this is what I call an absolute 100 degree lie. Yeah, the banks even have more power today. But in the 1930s, the Great Depression is going on. And for very good reason, a lot of people blame the banks and what the banks did. And when Europe looked like it might blow up by 1937, 38, there were a lot of Americans saying, I'm not going to get involved again so bankers get rich. I'm not going to let bankers take all my money. I'm not going to die for a bank, for the bond market. And lastly, industry. U.S. industry was making a lot of money off of this, off of war. They're selling all of this steel or food or fertilizer, all these things. So if they're selling all this, art, pretty, isn't it? But Britain's short of money, aren't they? Sure, they can borrow money, but they're also, or they're selling bonds and paying for that, but there's all kinds of agreements and contracts that they can't pay for. What they're giving is promissory notes, IOUs. Sell us this steel, and down the road we'll pay you back. Once again, they got to win. Does that make sense? But here's where it gets more complex. So let's say this is a piece of paper from the British Treasury to U.S. Steel. I'm U.S. Steel. 60% of the steel production in the United States, I do it all. Piece of paper saying Britain promises next year to pay me $1 million. $1 million, so I have this. They just throw it away. They don't need that kind of money. They have this. They don't have money, do they? They have a piece of paper. But this is like money, isn't it? What can they do with this? Yeah, they can sell it. Or sell pieces of it. So to the coal producers or iron producers, they sell a little bit of that debt. Railroads, a little bit of that debt. They put it in the bank and use that as collateral to borrow more money. Then the banks will use that and sell it. And sell it, and sell it, and sell it.
The U.S. does this?
U.S. companies. So like U.S. Steel. So these are companies doing this. So they're chopping up that debt and using that as money. Now you think that sounds crazy? No, it's called securitization. And it's really complex.
So the U.S. companies speculated?
In a way, it kind of is, yeah. They're basically all gambling that the British are going to pay back this debt.
So it just says like other industries?
Yeah, all these industries. But think about it, then it ripples to all the other industries and then into the banking world. Well, what happens if Britain loses? Okay, so they can't pay back U.S. Steel, but then what else happens?
There you go, so can't pay back.
They can't pay that back, all these companies, those companies can't pay back their debt, and it can ripple everywhere. So, Britain better win, right? So it's more than just selling stuff. It's this moving around of debt. And so with that, the United States entered. That is why it's going to be, looking back at it, a lot of people are going to say, why did we enter this thing? What was it for? So some companies can make some money? So if bankers can get their bonds back? Or for that matter, the world safe for democracy? Are you kidding? What's happening around the world? And we supported this awful czar. We did the same thing in World War II, fighting for democracy and freedom. And our biggest, most important allies, Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. Yeah.
What was this called? You said when they like sold the pieces of debt.
You don't need to know. It's called securitization. Just know that all the industry is tied together by debt.
Okay.
Securitization, that's security Americanization. But, and if that sounds relatively complex, you have no idea. It was securitization that would bring down the US economy in 2008. Fortunately, they're still doing it. Right, rest easy, people. Just in time for you to go to college, it could happen again. I'm old. Just throw my hands. It depresses me. Angers me is a better word. So, US entered the war. Now, Wilson assumed that the rest of the United States would agree with him. It is a moral imperative that we defeat the Germans. And he just had this belief, if I made this horrible decision but came to this conclusion, everybody else. He really did see himself as the moral compass of the country. And so, he just assumed the entire country would rise up and join. So they put a call out for volunteers. They assumed there'd be 1 million volunteers by the end of the month of April, and going to 4 million by the end of the summer. They needed troops desperately. We had no army. And what happened? They called out for volunteers. And what happened? Yeah, this might shock you, but people actually did not want to go fight and die in the trench. Weird, isn't it? There are lots of reasons. Self-preservation, but also, okay, yeah, we'll get into the war, but really, is this my war? Isn't this a war for somebody else? Nobody volunteered. So we got that. No one volunteered. This was a crisis. Wilson was appalled. He was shocked. How could people not volunteer? If they don't volunteer, what did he think it was? Treason. We must have traitors or German agents, meaning, what do we call us? Spies. They're committing what? There's a reason for the Espionage Act and why it's called that. There are traitors or there are spies, and that is why. That is why nobody volunteered. We are filled with traitors. Wilson was just taken aback. This is when you can see that the United States is going to do all those steps to lead to total war. That's where war madness is going to come from. Propaganda, getting everything geared together for war. But the first and most important thing is we got to get an army. But Wilson saw this as traitors amongst us. And this shows you a real shortcoming of Wilson. He did not understand that young men actually didn't want to die. I know that sounds weird. Of course, they should want to, right? But actually what he assumed was they'd all rally to the cause of making the world safe for democracy. And most people from Montana were like, well, I hope things work out for the Slavs in Austria. Can't rephrase that. Those European things, I don't know, people. Somewhere over there, I don't know where they're at. Well, so what this led to is Wilson's idea of we have to get the entire country geared up for war. What do we call this? Mobilization. We have to mobilize the entire nation. And once you have that, you have the steps towards war. And the first thing we need, social unity. We've all got to come together. Now that might not be a bad thing. You can see times where, isn't it great that we all come together? But this is coercive. We want to come together to convince people not to resist going to trenches and dying. So what's the first law they would pass? Because they had to do it by necessity. No one's volunteering. What do we need? What do we call that? What's the law? Come on, what's the law? I got a pen, and I know how to use it. Service.
I was thinking that, but I didn't do it right. Maggie, just give me the other one.
Or as I put on the quiz, secretive service.
Oh, yeah.
Selective service, that's the draft. And that's the thing then. You gotta set up a system where people don't resist going to the draft. You can see a direct line to starting selective service. And you can't have people out there saying, don't volunteer to go to the war. Will lead directly to the Espionage Act. Now we'll come back to the Espionage Act. I'll finish that really quick on Monday. But what is the draft? What does it mean? Young men, when they're 18, I'm sorry, 19, this one. 19, What, they have two choices, they're given by the government. What are the two choices? Go to war or
Go to jail.
go to jail.
Oh, there's no pay.
No,
You can't like pay out of.
No, not for this one.
that was from like the older board.
That's Civil War. Good. You're in Civil War, they allowed that. This one, it didn't happen. Now, when we get to Vietnam, that would kind of happen again. These are a lot of problems. If you had some money, you go to college, or at least at first. So, and the thing is, jail would be made, jail is already horrible. I don't know if you know that. You can write this down, jail bad. You don't want to go to jail. I know it's everything, but life. A life of crime ending in an awful term, life of imprisonment sounds awesome. It's not. Jail would be made as harsh as possible for anybody who resisted the draft, as harsh as possible. Why? As a deterrence from doing this. So, you have the draft. So they slowly start building an army. The thing is, we don't have an army. So you can't just immediately say, okay, you two are in the army, go to France and fight. Don't you need some things? What might you need? Yeah, food, come on. You got hands, don't you? Guns, food, uniforms. What else do you need? You gotta know how to fire the thing, don't you? Dude, who's gonna lead you? It's just gonna be a mob. The officers and sergeants. You need to organize an army. And that doesn't come easy. I mean, they're gonna build camps all over to start training troops. And they gotta train them as quickly as possible. And the thing is, we'll come back to it, but there's going to be resistance to the draft. By the way, one of those camps would be in rural Kansas. You got to build places where people don't live, right? It appears where they built it was a dormant virus that really didn't have a lot of human interaction. Then all of a sudden, you have a dormant virus that's being transmitted by rats. It gets on people. These are soldiers who begin to be shipped all over the country. I wonder what might happen. Anybody want to guess what will come out of this? The Spanish flu, the biggest of the modern pandemics. I know they call it the Spanish flu, but it almost certainly began in Kansas. Whatever. But whenever they talk about like a worldwide epidemic, or remember the thing about Ebola in Africa, they always compare it to the Spanish flu that's coming, and that we'll talk about on Monday or Tuesday. Wilson might have contracted it while negotiating the treaty. It was scary. It was really scary for your age. Your age was the most susceptible. Your bodies would fight it so hard that it would actually kill. It would kill you in the fight. Older folks like me, our bodies don't fight as hard, so we might actually live. That seems that's counterintuitive, isn't it? But that's what happened. So select these areas. We need uniforms, though. We need equipment. You can't just go fight. And so they had to mobilize the entire economy for war now. Everything. And that's where we get a series of war boards. And these war boards would be designed to mobilize the economy. Once again, we were taken by surprise by this. We as in the US government. The assumption was they would put orders out and American businesses would stop production of consumer goods and go to military.
The boards of people like.
Yeah, like a regulatory one. And
I didn't.
just a plain. No, I know. I'm glad you asked that question. It was like a regulatory board. They just there's a board. War. Hey, you need a gun? No, we got a board. So good question. Thank you for asking that. And it never even crossed my mind. Because so when you asked that, I thought, oh yeah, that's probably a good question.
The only thing I was thinking board like
I wish this would. All right, so the reason why this was necessary is that business totally resisted. Business totally resisted this. Business leaders, aka capitalists, didn't want the war contracts. They didn't want to build artillery carriages or cannon or gun or change the vehicles they produced, the vehicles for war. They didn't want to do this. Why? Very simple. Very simple. It's a massive cost. They have to go, yeah.
Could you say what war boards were?
War boards were these regulatory bodies
Yeah.
that would be created to basically control the control of the economy.
For war, that's
Mhm. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of war boards. So like think of like a board of directors, but not like a big board of directors. Thank you for saying that. I'm really, because I knew what they were, so I just kind of went with it. I wonder if 3rd and 4th graders looking at me like,
I kind of figured that's what it was, but I'm just not sure.
I'm glad you did. Think about Henry Ford. So Henry Ford began in 1911, they began that assembly line. And what kind of cars he made?
Fords. Model T.
Model Ts.
Fords.
another.
He doesn't want to retool his entire factory, which would be really expensive. Retool that entire factory from making Model Ts to artillery carriages or vehicles for war or those newfangled tanks. He doesn't want to spend that money. Sure, he'll get the money for the government contract. That's a big cost. Because think of it in this terms. Okay, so it takes a long time, all this money. While that's happening, he's not making money. So that's an issue. Okay, so now, 6 months, he finally starts producing this. Let's say, best case scenario. Then the war ends. Who's going to want the artillery carriages anymore? And what's he going to have to do then? Retool back. So, it is such a cost to go from consumer goods to war, then back to consumer goods. It's such a huge cost. You don't want to pay the cost? You don't want it. So business leaders resisted, and that's why Congress created these to control the economy. They'll make business produce. There are 2 boards we need to know. The first one, the War Industries Board. The WIB, or the War, excuse me, the War Industries Board. And the War Industries Board was the biggest one, and a lot of people look back and see this as a great success. It would be indirectly run, even though he would try to be a failure, he would get a lot of credit after the war for this. A financier, so we had an investment bank by the name of Bernard Baruch. And Baruch was considered this marshaling American industrial might.
What's the first name?
Bernard Baruch.
He was the banker.
Yeah, he was a banker. And Wilson put him in charge of this board. And this board is going to have immense power. They will set production. They will set costs. They will set profits. Oh yeah, they guarantee you'll make profits, but you're going to have to make what we tell you. You're going to have to make guns or tanks or freighters or destroyers. You just think about anything for war. And they will dictate it. And this goes all the way to, and then they would eventually create an overland transport board, but for transportation, for coal supplies, for mining. I mean, this had immense control. And so the U.S. will gear the economy through central planning. The government will control what people produce. Yeah.
What is this of the profits?
They essentially tell you how much you'll make. This is how much. This is what we agree it will cost you to build this. And this is what we'll pay you. Period. Yeah, they might find ways to raise the profit, but they try to set it. And the idea was, if you could cut costs, then they'll cut your profit. Well, they made a big deal about it going into 1918. It's producing goods. American artillery and guns will be at the front. But just U.S. troops, when they first got there, will use British rifles, French artillery, and French planes at first. With the idea then they'll start using American stuff. Isn't that ironic? The French are borrowing money by them from the United States, from U.S. banks, to make artillery to sell it back to the U.S. at a big profit. It's maybe not the best way to run a business, but did this work? Disaster. It was top-heavy, cumbersome. There was basically, do you remember the term? What was the term stealing from government? Do you remember that? There's graft where companies were overcharging, lying about this. You know, add this where it's going to be this cost, but it didn't happen. It failed miserably. Business leaders still resisted. And so after a couple reforms of this, finally it was announced, the plan was massive amounts of American equipment will get to American soldiers by the spring, end of spring of 1919. Sound good? Success. What's ironic about that? Yeah, the war had been over for 5 months. So the War Industry Board did not work. World War II had done much better. One board did work, and it's called the Food Board. And the Food Board would be run by an engineer by the name of Herbert Hoover, or Hubert Heaver. Hoover, an able administrator, and he would marshal the vast quantity of American food to be produced for wartime and also for our allies. And he did an amazingly effective job, at least on the surface. Because you can't grow all sorts of things because it's or a big variety because you need food that's easily transportable and you can bring to the front line and also give to your allies. And he also would encourage, and this would be seen as relatively successful, individual families to deal with the shortages of food because now the war, victory gardens, where they would have big gardens. Hoover would come out of this as one that's considered to be one of the most able administrators in American history, a Titanic reputation. Families would grow their own gardens to make up for the shortage of food. Is that what you're going to ask, Suleiman? Yeah. And Hoover would eventually, this would propel him to the presidency in 1928. Don't throw your stuff around.
So they grow their own.
Yeah, or at least as much as they can to supplement with the shortages. You know, the idea was, like if you had a yard, get rid of it, plant tomatoes or lettuce or something. When Hoover was elected president, as he was seen as like one of the most qualified men ever to be president, then what would happen? Anybody know what would happen? Exactly. Stuff happens. The Great Depression. Have a good weekend, everybody. Try your best to get through it. I know weekends are tough. Just remember one very important thing. It'll be over like that. I will record. Is anybody else going to go just Hannah in this class? Bunch of people gone to the other classes. What's the story? What's the music? They're going to be Kalispell, is that right, Hannah?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I just want something. It's definitely not.
No, they're not only things have a full sentence.
I think. Oh, I was just, I thought you were going to be so I'm doing that last things. Oh, all right.
Oh, no.
See you.
Okay, yeah, it involves, just so we get so we can all make.
No, I don't want to go anyway. Yes.
It really does, though.
Yeah. I don't want to.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea.
Have a good weekend. Oh, whatever. Oh, I wanted.
What was that?
And I was hit. Oh, arm hit. I was foul.
Whatever.
Give your hand. I'm gonna hit that hand. Yeah. You know, it was a lot like hitting a spatula. A thumb. Yeah, did David bump you? Yeah. It's little pinky.
I don't think that's gonna work.
It's really jumpy.
Yes.
Yeah, we lost.
It's gonna work.
Very good.
Doing what? Standing there? He gets so pissed about it.
Well, I don't even know that I did. First of all,
No, it's fine.
I don't know. You get like mad at me or something, and then it's like I can't. Oh, like, I don't
Let's see the pictures how to do this.
I wouldn't do that. Like, I'm just gonna keep it like really bad.
They're like,
We're talking.
about the jail, and they're all like,
That's how a man responds.
I thought it went
Yeah,
away.
I realize that. I'm trying to get shit done.
I was like,
honestly, I think you because like
I know,
he sat down, he looks.
Robert still can't talk. What do we gotta do, people? I'm guessing you got your tonsils.
I'm just.
You don't have your tonsils either?
pretty sure I did.
We gotta rip something out.
Or if I did, I was joking.
See, we have something. I don't have anesthesia. But the surgery, which is. Yeah, basically, it's Oh. Okay, you see that? Yes, I always want to. Ah, not me. No, I don't want to be the transfer of face thing. Everyone's trying to do the transfer. I don't want that. It's too creepy. Don't. What's that, Corey? What are those, Corey? I've been teaching at 16 to 17 years, people.
16 or 17 years.
Oh, yeah.
I'm waving.
Break it in is what
What?
Yeah.
Feelings about wanting our
I always try myself because I said there's all one side of the conversation.
All right. So we will have the test. What day do you want the test? So I'm starting to figure out your little scam here, people. We can't have the test until the presentations are done. Yeah. Yeah, I saw you back there talking away and doing. I'm just waiting for you to go ahead. I can't hear you, what? All right, so let's go ahead and finish up. We're right on. I showed you the shirt, the color, didn't I? Yeah. What are you doing, man?
Oh, she's an all-star. Yeah. She's incredible. Maybe that's what she's doing.
No, I think she's back on
Oh, I thought they said something about 1 minute ago.
you say that they was okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and finish this off. I showed you that coat. There were, with the first shot, how do we know? Make it a little flat. Ow! Did you make it? All right, now if you throw it way down the hall for Mr. Carter's room, I threw it
on that side to get to bounce off that locker, then the other locker, and then to Mr. Mahelish's room. And guess what is right now in Mr. Mahelish's room? I don't like to brag. That was remarkable.
That one for you.
Yeah, you want to see it? Do you believe me?
No, I think we
You
should go.
don't believe me?
We should go and then this squash. No.
Yeah.
See, people are telling us in software,
Yeah.
we're gonna take over, let's just go take over, communities, experience, well, country class.
Two things. First off, the ball was just sitting there in the middle of Mr. Mahelish's room, and no one even noticed. What fun is it? They don't even notice.
You gotta do it again.
They ever-
Complain about you just like throwing stuff, trying to make it into that room.
I haven't hit that many people. And the other thing is this. Then if I try to go way back to get into Ms. Slau's room, and it just hit like the edge of the door. Yeah. Oh, it's right.
Have you ever gotten in Larson's room, like